Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our August 3rd Tuesday at 3 webcast series event. This month's topic is about cloud cover, specifically on hybrid work. My name's Alan Falcon. I'm the CEO and pragmatic cloud evangelist here at Cumulus Global. I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day and busy week to join us here live or to be watching this webinar on demand from our website or YouTube channel. Before we get into the meat of the session today, a couple of housekeeping items. You'll note that the audio is muted to prevent any background noise from getting in the way today. So if at any point in the time you have a question or comment, use the icons on the upper side or right-hand side of your screen, open that questions window. It lets me track to make sure we've got all the Q&As answered before we end up here. I'll try to answer them in line if I can. If not, we've got plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the session as well. This session is being recorded. We generally get things posted within 24 hours of the completion of the webcast. We'll send you an email with the link. Please feel free to share. And as always, a reminder that on our website, we have a full resource center that includes everything from our blog, a library of ebooks and white papers and other types of reports, not only on-demand recordings for our third Tuesday at 3 webcast series, but also our Coffee and Cloud series, which are shorter, more focused. And if you watch one of those on demand, you have the option of selecting a coffee gift card that we'll send you in the mail. So please take advantage of those resources that we have available for you at your convenience, 7/24 on the website. So today when we talk about hybrid work and the change that's happening, we're going to get right into the meat of it here and talk about some of the challenges that we see happening as businesses make the change. And we'll look at it not just from a technological standpoint, from a business operations standpoint as well. And then we'll sort of look at hybrid work. Where's your starting point? What are those next steps you're going to take after you get get settled in, or if you're settled in already and you're looking to improve your hybrid work environment and efficacy? And then what's typically left at the end of the process? And this is where most companies sort of come to a stop. They'll go through what we see as the starting point. They'll take the next step. They'll get to a certain point. Time, energy, or they believe the budget gets in the way of really going, doing what's left and what's next in the process. And we'll talk about a solution for an aspect of this, specifically around virtual desktop infrastructure. You might have heard a lot of talk in the technology media about Azure Windows Desktop, and obviously Citrix Solutions provides this and other services as well. We'll sort of talk about that as a strategic play for small and mid-sized businesses who have often thought that this was above their need and beyond their means. And we'll show how that's not really the case anymore. So let's dive right in. So first, when we look at defining hybrid work, at a high level, it's basically meaning that you've got people, at least one person who works on-premise and one person who works remotely, and that may or may not be the same person. And so when we talk about hybrid work, though, there are two dimensions to it. One, it's at a very individual level, right, where you have an employee who's going to work remotely sometimes and on-premise sometimes. And knowing that, ideally, if they're working remotely or even on-premise in both locations, they may or may not have a dedicated workspace. So, we've certainly seen situations where people are working remotely from home or worked from home during the pandemic and have continued beyond that. And while in the pandemic, it might have been fine for them to be working at their dining room table, they don't really have a dedicated workspace separate from their living space, to conduct their business. Similarly, that remote work may not be at home at all. It could be a co-work location, a shared office suite type of arrangement, and they may not be working at the same location every time. Similarly, when that individual is on premise, companies who are really moving to hybrid work, some of them have moved into the concept of hoteling desks, where if you've got one person who's in the office Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and another's Tuesday, Thursday, that they share a workspace, right? And we won't get into the pros and cons of shared workspaces and hoteling, and that's a subject. We can do hours on that separately. Just as you can argue about open floor plan versus non-open floor plan and the impact it has on culture and on engagement and on productivity. Just realize that when we talk about individual hybrid work, we're talking about the person who's moving back and forth, and their work environment when they're in the office and their work environment when they're out of the office, wherever that might be. Bigger picture, hybrid work is organizational. And at the organizational level, it just means you've got employees who are in the office and are not in the office, and they're all working for you. And on an individual basis, you might have some full-time on-premise, you might have some full-time remote, you have other people who are in that hybrid mode. But organizationally, if you've got any one person not working regularly in the office, where their out-of-office work isn't for a special reason or an occasional thing, then you have, to some degree, a hybrid work environment and a hybrid workforce. And the reason I phrase it that way is, a lot of companies in the past have said, oh no, we're all on premise. Oh, but we have salespeople out on the road making sales calls, and they're doing, they're placing orders from their laptops, so they'll stop at, they're having lunch, they'll update notes in our CRM system. Guess what? You weren't 100% in office. You had a hybrid work environment. We just didn't recognize it as such, even though some of the same challenges and benefits and considerations come into play. So with that stated, let's look at some of the challenges, and we'll look at it, from two sides of the same coin, if you will. And the first side is the technology side, right? So if you're in a hybrid work environment, you need to worry about access. How do people get in, into the systems? How do they gain access to the applications they need, the data sets they need, the files, the communication tools, into that whole environment? And there are a number of different ways to do it. And some of the historical ways, or the ways that were put into place in the rush to go remote with the pandemic, aren't necessarily the most efficient or cost-effective in the long term. Communications is another issue. And again, we saw the scope of this with the pandemic when people evacuated their offices and working from home. Suddenly what happens if there's no one answering the main phone number at the reception desk, right? Or if someone calls into an employee, and because you don't have integrated communications that calls even forwarding to their cell phone, how do they forward that call to another person if it's misdirected or it isn't really something that they can help with, right? So communications becomes a challenge. Security and compliance, with hybrid work, you no longer have people all sitting in a physical space behind a physical firewall and all sorts of physical protections for your computer environment. So security and compliance becomes a lot, more vectors, more layers, more complex, and in some cases actually more manageable given the modern tools and capabilities that are out there. And we'll dive into this a little bit more as we go through the session. But suffice it to say, you're not just looking at securing a person who's working on a company-owned asset in the office. You're worried about securing that person's identity, the information that they might have locally with them on any device, the applications and systems they might have access to, on their person, location independent on any device, as well as the network and the devices themselves. And so there's multiple layers that really have nothing to do with where the person physically works, but more with what they use and how they use it, and how do you keep unwanted people out, and how do you keep secure, protected, private data in. The fourth challenge is BYOD, bring your own device. In a lot of instances, people and organizations that have hybrid work are allowing users to bring their own device. Or we've even seen organizations where someone who's normally in office all the time has a desktop computer. The company's not ready to spend the money to replace that with a laptop. So when that employee's working at home, they're working on their personal family PC that's in a bedroom or an office or the den or wherever. And that raises a whole set of issues around privacy, protection, security, malware prevention. It gets complex, right? And of course, the last three technology challenges, particularly when people are looking remotely, is performance, availability, and reliability. And we've seen folks, small businesses with, hybrid or remote workers say, well, you know what, we've got, great desktop, remote, physical desktop software with something like GoToMyPC, where someone remotely is actually connecting to a physical client machine internally and accessing that way. That has complexities with performance and reliability. Certain common VPNs take a lot to manage. Even remote desktops at a network level can be complex and impact that performance, availability, and reliability. And so there's a number of technology challenges that come with hybrid work simply because you're not operating in a physically contained environment anymore. On the business side of things, there are all sorts of issues around hybrid work. Can your teams communicate effectively in the way they prefer to communicate to be individually productive and effective in teams, right? Are you enabling collaboration, or are you preventing it given your communications infrastructure and how people work? How does hybrid work fit with your company culture? And, it's interesting because now, there's been great articles, about the culture shift, right? And how studies now have been done that say, well, if people are working from home or remotely or a hybrid, there's, a firm in China did a detailed double-blind study and found that software engineers could be 8% more productive if they're working at home. At the other side of the culture thing, though, is we hear about concerns about culture bias. So promotions, people are more comfortable promoting people. They have a stronger interpersonal relationship, and that face-to-face communication and contact fosters that. And what's the role of the informal, if you've got a service team, if they're sitting together and they overhear each other's calls, or they chat, make small talk in the break room, they talk, oh, I had this call, this was weird, oh, I had one similar, those types of informal conversations where knowledge is shared and transported. If that's all part of the company culture, how do you manage that in a hybrid environment? It also goes into roles and responsibilities. And again, here, there are tools out there now that are monitoring people's work for their productivity and efficiency, particularly remote workers, without necessarily having a benchmark to understand how it might differ from someone who's working on premise. And how do you so how do you take that, and how do you actively and accurately and appropriately supervise people so that you understand what they're working on and whether or not they're meeting goals, and if they need help or resources, without the stopwatch measuring, without counting mouse clicks, without watching for physical movement, right? that would come into play. And all of this, of course, impacts not only individual productivity, but team productivity. And you can look and say the studies so far have really focused on individuals, that certain individuals, many individuals, in fact, can be individually more productive at home where there's less work environment distractions. But how do you account for team productivity, particularly if you're in a collaborative environment, and communication and co-working is so important. And finally, there's the cost. Hybrid can introduce, and we'll talk about saving opportunities, but in the way most companies in the rush to deal with the pandemic dealt with remote work and hybrid work, added cost. And a lot of that cost is duplicative and unnecessary, and we'll talk about managing that as well. So there's some significant challenges. And if we look at it from a different angle, we'll talk about your network resources, and that's in access. And that's really the full spectrum of issues. So what I mean, when you talk about accessing your company's network, right, with hybrid work, it's everything. It's access, it's security compliance, it's how you deal with BYOD, it's performance, availability, and reliability. All of that comes into play, when you talk about your network and presenting your network resources. At the security level, we've moved beyond firewalls. There's still necessary physical firewalls and software firewalls, but they only protect you from one vector, right? We need to worry about cyber threats and crimes for which, human behavior and email is in corrupted websites are the primary ways in. You need to protect individual and group identities and access management, right? We have to worry about data loss prevention, keeping data in the environment, keeping it from leaking out. And then, of course, data protection, knowing that should the unthinkable happen or the unexpected happen, your data is protected, you can recover it, you don't lose data as a result of accidental or intentional actions by any individual or group, internal or external. And so the security challenge blossoms because of the complexity inherent in a hybrid work environment. Telephony, I spoke about this under communications before, and Really what it comes down to is, do you have a unified customer experience? Is the fact that people are working remotely or in hybrid invisible to your customers and people you deal with through telephony and even internally within your organization? It was great in an emergency. Hey, forward your extension to your cell phone, but that doesn't work when you're in a business where you might need to hand off a call from a service desk to an expert or from one department to another. And you need that experience. Not to mention, do you really want someone who's calling your business to get a personal voicemail, outgoing message from an employee rather than a professional company-oriented one? Just as we talk about that unified customer experience, there's the employee experience. And what do they get for performance, availability, and reliability? Is the environment more on par in the office than if they're remote? Or is the employee experience similar or even better yet, identical? Where it's set up so it doesn't really matter where they're working from. Their user experience, the way they access their systems is the same. And it's not uncommon for us to say, hey, when you're in the office, you connect in, your device authenticates to the network, you log into your device, you're into the domain, you have access to your applications, they're on your desktop, they're all running. But then when you go home, it's like, well, you can't actually do that, unless you've got a VPN set up. You got to make the VPN connection, and then it works the same way, only much slower. Or you're like, oh, click on this icon and connect in a way. But now when you're home, you do everything through the web browser or through this client. When you're in the office, you're accessing it directly. You create additional learning curve. You create additional stress with those differences in employee experience. So we want a constant and consistent employee experience. There's devices then. Obviously, company versus personal, the BYOD conundrum. It's great. It can save companies money. It can also create headaches, open you up to liability and litigation. Many things can go wrong with an improperly managed BYOD program. When we talk about proper management of the devices, it's not just how do you connect that device securely and protect your company and your company's use on that device from the personal use on that device and what people might do personally with those devices, right? So this, given that scope, this isn't just about the technology and the software you put in to manage that device. It's about corporate policy, human resource policy, procedures, requirements that are clear and understood by your employees and what it means for them to use a personal device to connect on company resources and do work for the company. And with that devices also comes the capital planning cycle, right? And we see that the capital planning cycle for remote work and hybrid work is going to focus on different things, and it's going to be different than traditional capital planning cycles for on-premise IT. And that, while it's a challenge, can definitely and should work to significant advantage. And then there's the cost. When you start saying, well, I'm building an environment on-premise, and now I need to plug in or add on, technology and support and services for remote and hybrid work, you've got more infrastructure, and more costs more, right? And so it's, sometimes people say less is more. Well, in this case, more is more. And given that more is more, we want to minimize what that more is and do it in a way. So where's your starting point? For most organizations, the starting point in supporting hybrid work already exists within their productivity suite. And I'm using the term productivity suite. It's Google Workspace or G Suite if you're still on that version. It's Microsoft 365 or Office 365 if you're still on those versions. And it's really for information workers, for knowledge workers, for workers, even production workers that need to create or view information or communicate with others, right? The productivity suite becomes a cornerstone of your IT environment for those individuals, for departments, teams, as well as the company. And so your productivity suite has your core apps, email, calendar, contacts, your editors. This is your Microsoft Word, your Google Sheets, your Google Slides, your PowerPoint presentations, etc., as well as file services, both personal space, such as OneDrive and MyDrive, and shared space, shared drives in the Google environment, SharePoint file services, Teams, etc., in the Microsoft 365, Office 365 environment. On top of that, the productivity suite layers in communications, instant messaging and chat, video, both for video chat as well as meetings, and even live streaming, one-to-many type environments, depending on the platform and the level of license you have. And both Google Workspace and Microsoft 365 have now what we refer to as shared spaces, right? And so in the Google side, it is within the construct of the new chat and meets infrastructure, there are now spaces. And a space is both messaging, audio, video conferencing. It's also to-do lists and files. On the Microsoft side, you've got Microsoft Teams. It is a shared space. You've got a shared communication thread. You've got a shared file structure. You've got shared tabs and channels that you can plug in applications that people need to share. You can build in workflow. There's a lot of capabilities in both of these environments, and Teams is extremely powerful for many organizations, particularly we see it of great value in smaller businesses that are project-based with their clients, where each project becomes a team. You've got the channels for the different parties involved. You've got all of your communications, your meetings, your calendaring, your files in one spot, the applications you need to service that project are there, and boom, when it's done, you can archive it off and spin up a team for the next project, right? Productivity Suite, I sort of digressed a little bit, I apologize. Productivity Suite includes identity management. And this is important because for many small and mid-sized companies, SMBs, you don't really need third-party identity and access management systems. And that extra cost, you can leverage the identity management capabilities of your Productivity Suite to help you manage identity and access to other systems you might integrate. And that's where Productivity Suites become a platform for other integrated applications. So for example, you might, if you're using Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 and you're going to use HubSpot for marketing automation, you can integrate HubSpot so it's using your Gmail or your Office 365 mail for sending and receiving messages. The calendars integrate. You have access from inside HubSpot into your file system, whether it's OneDrive or SharePoint or Google Drive. You can integrate those applications and you can link the identities, right? So that you can actually log in to your marketing automation system using your Google Workspace or your Microsoft 365 identity and have that sort of single user identity to get you into multiple systems. So then what's the next step, right? The next step is, well, where do the business applications come in or the operational applications come in? And it's really about your tools and your services. And for most SMBs, this isn't, I've got an application, I'm going to rebuild it to run natively in Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure or AWS, right? That's not the type of applications that small and mid-sized businesses use. We use package applications, and hopefully those packaged applications have a SaaS or a cloud-based version that we can leverage and use, okay? And so the next step after you have your Productivity Suite, which by the way supports the hybrid work environment, right? Your access is web-based or it's through the desktop applications. It doesn't care where your client is located. Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace don't care what the device is. Both are accessible from any device with an internet connection and a compatible browser. And both of them offer native client support for Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android. They just don't care, right? So you have that independence. So when we talk about the security is the same, the communications the same, the capabilities are the same, access is the same, and given that it's all direct internet connection, it really scales with your internet speed, performance is the same, right? It's the same user experience. So how do we take that to the next step, which is SaaS solutions? And this is, again, where your business applications, those tools and services to come in. And here it's not just a matter of signing up and migrating into the cloud version of your Sage financial system or moving from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. You actually, with these online services, have the ability, as I mentioned earlier, to manage your identities, do federated logins, integration of file services, integration of email and other communications, and integration of other services that you may have, right? So for example, we as a company happen to use HubSpot for marketing automation and for managing our sales process. Okay, when you registered for this webcast, you filled out a HubSpot form that actually behind the scenes registered you with our, go-to-webinar webcasting service that we use. And that interconnection and your participation in this is tracked and lets us know back in HubSpot that, yep, you registered and you attended, right? Or you registered but you didn't attend. We get that information back. It integrates. And why is this important for hybrid work? It's important because that creates the same user experience, the same performance, availability, and reliability expectations, whether or not you're in the office or whether or not you're remote. And so if you've moved, your productivity suite, and you've fully moved into the productivity suite, meaning you're not running a file server locally anymore even, and you're using SaaS solutions and you've integrated them, you federated the login, or maybe even a third-party single sign-on and security tool, if that's warranted, and for some it is, for others it's not. What you've done is you've created an environment that says, hey, it doesn't matter if you're in the office, right? And behind our firewall, you're not dependent on any resources local to the physical office. It's all in the cloud. Accessing it from the office is the same as accessing it from your home or from the coffee shop or from a co-working location. It really doesn't matter. You create that independence and you create that unified employee experience comes in. Now, the reality is not every network or desktop application you run as a small business has a cloud version, and not every business, in fact, many businesses can't use the cloud versions of their system as well. So for example, we as a business, we run on a QuickBooks Premier Edition that has reports and certain features that aren't available in their online edition yet. Every year, as they add features to QuickBooks Online, they get closer, but it's not there yet. We would lose functionality that we rely on a monthly and quarterly basis. Similarly, we know people, we know companies that are, using Sage 100, but they have a third-party custom, inventory system that doesn't integrate with Sage 100 Cloud and won't run in the cloud. So for them, Sage 100 Cloud is not an alternative to that on-premise. And so what's left is typically things that don't have a SaaS version you can use, or that you want to use because of features or integration or customization. And in other apps for, again, there is no SaaS alternative or custom apps. And so, nope, this diagram's a little off. Your email server's gone. That's in your productivity suite. But chances are you may have additional file servers still locally. You might be doing database and storage locally. You might have a backup appliance or backup archive server locally. You may have specific application servers, and chances are you've got on-premise domain controllers, primary and backup, to facilitate and manage those. And maybe those are separate physical machines, maybe they're virtual machines running on one or two pieces of physical hardware, but you've got that physical infrastructure in place, which means you still need a firewall and you still have the same remote access issues you have and the same user experience, consistency, and performance and reliability issues you have as if you hadn't moved anything to the cloud. You still have this on-premise infrastructure. Now, let me be really clear. There are situations where moving processing into the cloud is not appropriate, right? If you're a manufacturer, the system that's, controlling your manufacturing process, more likely than not, 99.9% chance needs to be on-premise, needs to be operating at LAN speeds. It doesn't mean that components of it, the financial integration, the reporting, the quality assurance piece can't be remote, right? But clearly, if you've got computers controlling machines, you want those computers connected and local to the machines. That said, for many, the majority of small, mid-sized businesses, most, if not all of their compute does not need to be on-premise from an operational and execution standpoint. So that's where the virtual desktop infrastructure comes in. And this is using Azure, and it's, is a model, and it's slightly oversimplified, but you'll get the idea here, right? Here, what we're doing, when we talk about virtual desktop infrastructure, is we're simply shifting the computing from the local device to the cloud. And that is your network, its processing, its application servers, and data. Okay, and so what's missing in this diagram is if you have if you have a custom database application, this diagram should show an additional server that's hosting that application that those host pools of Windows 10 clients connect to. What I actually like about this diagram is it says, yep, you have a publishing layer, the control plane, if you will. There may be a server there that scales your resources based on demand and load balances. In a very simple, imaging here, that doesn't matter if you're on a tablet, a smartphone, or a laptop or computer, you're coming in the same way, right? And what basically is running on your end client, your end user or your client device is the local user interface. It's the keyboard clicks, it's the mouse motion and clicks, it's the presentation on the screen, it's the audio, it's the mic, it's the audio in, it's the audio out, it's everything except the processing. It's literally the user interface is local, everything else is up in the cloud. And that client is secure, it's encrypted, and it can even help, manage access. You can manage access to local resources. So if you've got a remote worker working at home and they got a printer that they physically plug in by USB to their laptop when they're at home, the secure client, you can decide whether or not the secure client will let someone print data in the cloud or file in the cloud to that local printer. You have that kind of control in a well-designed, well-implemented virtual desktop infrastructure. And so how does this come around for solutions? If we look, we've talked about performance, availability, reliability. We'll talk about cost as well. Performance, you now have consistent performance for all users. Yes, there could be variations based on internet access speeds, but for most people and organizations, broadband is generally available, somewhat ubiquitous. And even in other areas of the country where that's not the case, there are now high-speed, near broadband satellite options that are incredibly, or I don't want to say incredibly, they're very affordable. Orders of magnitude less expensive than they were even 4 or 5 years ago. You further manage performance because you're able to scale resources to adapt to the needs and resource demands. So and this hits at 2 levels. One, the macro level. I've got a 5-year-old server. It's starting to throw disk errors. I go to buy it. My IT consultant is going to say, gee, you're doing XYZ with the server. Over the next 3 to 5 years, what's that going to be? Let's buy a bigger server with extra disk. And you end up spending money on capacity that you're not going to use right away, that you might not even use in the first 60% of the life of that device. And there's a good chance you might not ever need it, right? So you're investing it. So that's the macro level. You don't need to overbuy to ensure you have enough capacity going forward. At the macro level, you can actually scale your cloud environment for the number of people actually using it. We're actually speccing out a solution for a client this week where they have about 15 people who need access to a system that we're putting into the cloud. 3 people are in it all the time. Everyone else comes in and out a few times a day. A few people only need to go in once a week or so. So what are we doing? They're going to have smaller systems in the cloud. They're going to have a device that hosts 4 clients. Relatively small, less expensive. The 3 people who are in it it'll be up and running all the time. When the 4th person logs in, it's going to automatically spin up a second little box that'll handle the next 4. So as the use goes up and the more concurrent users need to log in, the capacity is there. But when those people log out and it goes away, the capacity shrinks automatically and transparently to the end user, no delay in login. So instead of paying for the resources for 15 people to be logged in 24 hours a day, they're paying for the resources needed as they're needed throughout the day and out the week. Also from performance, you're primarily independent from client configuration. A good VDI environment is going to have native clients for Mac, Windows, Android, and iOS. You always have the option of going through the browser. You're not as worried about the client configuration because you're not doing the processing. You don't need as much processor and you don't need as much memory. This will come back when we talk about cost, but you can extend the life of your desktops and your laptops by 1 to 3 years by moving into VDI. And when you replace them, you can lower the cost because the requirements you need for that end client device are less when you're doing VDI than when you're doing the processing local. And you have that single user experience, right, that we talked about, that your employees, whether they're in the office or out of the office, they log in, they fire up the VDI client, or they open the browser if you're going that route. They have access to their applications, their data, their systems, their workflow. Doesn't matter if they're in the office, at home, at the coffee shop, waiting in the dentist's office, they're good to go. Availability, cloud services, VDI environments are built in top tier infrastructure, ISO certified, SOC 2 certified data centers, designed to meet privacy requirements and regulatory requirements. You've got built-in scalability and redundancy. And granted, most of the environments we set up for small businesses, we're not putting in redundant servers, but we're making sure that the disk space, the disk and the storage and all the information is on geographically redundant storage. Small incremental cost means if the vendor, if the provider, Microsoft or Google, has trouble with a data center, we can actually spin up those servers in another data center. Their data hasn't been lost or damaged. Integrated backup and recovery, no different than, both Google and Microsoft work with a shared responsibility model. They're responsible for the environment. You're responsible for all your data in the environment. So having the ability to back up and recover that data within the cloud environment is there. It's no different than backing up your servers that are on-premise. The difference is that, it's just cloud to cloud. Integrated scheduling, that gives you that scalable resource, lets you maximize the resources when you need it, save money when you don't. And protecting from local issues, right? That you're not worrying about what's happening in the local environment, particularly if it's BYOD. Your work environment, aside from that client that provides the access, is entirely separate from everything else that's happening on the machine. And again, if you don't allow disk access locally, then you've added another barrier against malware spreading from someone's personal machine into your corporate network. And all you really need to get in is that internet plus a browser or the client. Reliability, that top tier, we talked about, it's the data center, it's the network, it's the servers, it's the storage. You've got scalable services, so you don't run into reliability issues based on resource utilization. Again, you can be running on a size X server and your business grows, and you can simply transition that to a Y server. You're not replacing, you aren't replacing hardware, you aren't reconfiguring. The cloud environments are designed to let you say, hey, wait a minute, this is running on server X, now running on server Y that has more resources, and make that change without the traditional rebuild a server, migrate everything, reinstall everything mentality. It's done at an image level. And so the scalable services that are built in, and as I mentioned earlier, with the redundancy for reliability, you can have your disks redundant, you can have your servers be redundant, you can have entire networks be redundant. It can be within one data center, it can be geographically dispersed. You've got a lot of flexibility. You can scale up the redundancy you need based on the continuity and resilience needs of your business. And the more critical you are to 7x24, 365 operations, the more you can do, the more cost you incur, but the more you can do. But we can match the level of redundancy to best serve the needs of your business. And those operations and those data are third-party audited and certified against international US and industry standards. Security is a biggie. Because security is the number one issue facing small and mid-sized businesses with respect to their IT now. And it's not just the still rampant increase in ransomware and malware, it's identity theft, it's business email compromise. We blogged earlier this year about attacks on real estate agents, where the attackers are gaining enough information, enough access to pretend to be the real estate agent, and they're telling people to transfer deposits on houses they've supposedly won, and just stealing the real estate agent's client's money and creating a huge logistical, legal, and financial mess for everyone involved, right? So security is this huge issue for SMBs and for small mid-sized businesses. Here, you move your environment to the cloud. You're running it. Your core environment is compliant and secure. The systems come with security tools and management systems that let you configure the security you need and manage it and be alerted or alarmed when things happen. You integrate your identity and access management service into that environment. And with little or no local data, it's all inside that bubble, right? And with that shared responsibility model, you know the vendor, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Amazon, whomever, is providing this secure infrastructure. You then make sure your applications and your data are properly secured, just as you normally would, even if they were on premise, and you've got a secure environment. The reality is you can secure your information systems. You can make them more secure for less money in the cloud than you can do on premise. And the final solution comes to money, right? I almost replaced the S in solutions with the dollar signs here, right? And it hits in two ways: capital expenditure and operating expense. And moving to the cloud is a shift from CapEx to OpEx. And at times that's touted as a good thing. At times people say, well, it can make it more expensive over the lifetime. And so we talk about solutions, we talk about CapEx and OpEx. We're not just going to look at hard dollars, we're going to look at the value proposition. So with capital expenditures, as I mentioned earlier, you avoid these major upgrades. You don't have to buy a server every 3 to 5 years. You don't need to buy capacity that you're not ready to use, or worry about compatibility when you have to expand capacity in the midlife life cycle of a server, right? You have extended life for client devices. Typically, we're seeing an extended life of an additional 1 to 3 years. I'd say on 2 is probably a good average, but you can lessen your buy cycle. Additionally, we've got, organizations that, because they've gone VDI, are now buying netbooks and Chrome devices that, support the VDI client they're using, and not even buying full-blown laptops with operating systems and disk and things of that nature. And they're cutting that client-level expenditure by, anywhere from 50% to 70%, and they're cutting their total cost of ownership over a 3-year period by 2/3, right? You can eliminate ancillary servers, right? So you might have you might still have stuff, even though you have some SaaS and you're doing your productivity suite in the cloud. If you've got an application server running locally, chances are you also have a backup server or appliance and at least one, hopefully 2, domain controllers, right? So moving into the cloud lets you eliminate those ancillary servers that really you're paying for and you're maintaining to run the environment for the servers you're actually using to run your business. And certainly you can reduce your network infrastructure, and we can simplify things. If you're not, for example, if you have multiple locations, we can usually eliminate location to location networking. Everything's from each location up to the cloud. So it's direct internet access. It's not wide area network. It's not regional networks. You can simplify the infrastructure there. You can move off of wire to wireless. We've got companies now that have gone full cloud, where what's left on premise is the router firewall that we put between them and the internet, a switch or 2, and the wireless access points that plug into those switches that provide the network for the environment, right? Clean, simple, easy to manage, easy to troubleshoot. Something goes wrong, don't need to send out a technician. Just need to send out a box. You unplug the power, you unplug the network connection, you plug the new one in, you're up and running, right? And so there's an operational advantage, but you're not spending money on heavy network infrastructure. On the operating expense, your software, operating systems, and services move to a subscription model. You pay for what you need when you need it. And in fact, now with things like Microsoft Windows, it's hard to buy a perpetual license. Everything's by subscription now. The advantage there is that you can scale services to meet the demands, not just strategically over time, but even throughout the day or throughout the week, as I've talked about earlier. And that helps you manage costs. And good VDI environments have integrated scheduling to reduce costs, where, for some companies it's set times, right? If 6 o'clock, we go from 3 servers to 2, but we can also do it dynamically based on actual utilization, right? So a crisis happens and half your company needs to log in at 10 o'clock at night. The servers you need and the resources you need spin up automatically. They're available. Midnight, the crisis is averted. Everything spins back down to your minimum footprint, and you stop paying for those additional resources. And you haven't paid for those resources to be active 7/24/365. Additionally, operationally now, most cloud vendors, because cloud is designed to be flexible and move month to month, are now offering discounts if a commitment is made. So example, on the Microsoft Azure side, depending on the configuration of the server you need, the cost can drop by 50% or more on a monthly basis, with a 3-year commitment. And you say, well, what if something changes that I need to swap out? Well, if you're swapping up, there's no worries. If you're swapping down, there might be an early exit penalty. But again, that's a fraction of the cost. Typically, it's a fraction of the cost. You're better off paying the penalty than maintaining the resource that you don't need, right? And we'll run through and we'll crunch the numbers with you to show you how that's going to work for you. And finally, you have the ability to integrate with your productivity and your SaaS solutions as well. And so it's knowing that, for example, if you've got a custom database application that your business runs and it's got Microsoft SQL Server, if we move that into the cloud and you're running Microsoft 365, we can connect Power BI to it and pull data out and let you integrate that data with other data you have for reporting, business intelligence, dashboards, things of that nature. So the OpEx not only can be managed and controlled, so it's comparable, we can add value to the environment and increase your capability without incremental cost, or without some incremental cost. And that's important as well. So what's your next step? And I've sort of talked on, and so a reminder, if you have any questions, please open up that questions window and ask away. We're heading towards the Q&A side. I apologize for the length of the presentation, but here's where we are. So what's your action? One, it's time to assess your environment and your needs. Are you cloud ready to begin with? Are you comfortable with it? What's the nature of your applications? What can and cannot, what should not move to the cloud? And let us help you with that assessment, give you ideas, and challenge any assumptions you might have that might be roadblocks to coming in. Now, granted, not everything can or should move to the cloud, but let's actually analyze it and make wise decisions there. Then let's look at the value proposition. It's a holistic view of your IT services, right? Not just the cost of moving application one into the cloud, but how does that fit? What does that enable? Yes, it's how does it change the hard dollars out the door? Is it more? Is it less? Is it comparable? But what does it give you that it doesn't? So for example, we had, one customer, we're making a move into cloud, was going to increase their IT costs by about 6%. And they were hesitant until we pointed out that, wait a minute, the additional security would actually enable them to negotiate a lower rate on some of their insurance. And so there ended up being a net savings there, right? And it was providing security services that they were going to need eventually for a client security audit. So they avoided future security enhancements to their on-premise environment by getting in the cloud where those services were already bundled in and available. So it really has to be a holistic view of your IT services, and you need to understand the cost of inaction. If we don't do anything, what's going to happen and how much might that cost me as an alternative? Because you can look and say, gee, cost of moving to the cloud is X, but if I don't do anything, cost of not doing it, if I have to change out servers or something, is going to be X plus 20% or X times 4, whatever it might be. And then we want to plan your solution. And so, look at the functionality that people need, the applications, the systems, the tools, the data, etc. And then we want to design for parks, right? Performance, availability, reliability, cost, and security. And take all of those into consideration to come with, and then pull the plug and execute. So if that's something you're interested, lift up your smartphone, scan capture the QR code. It'll take you to a meeting page. You can schedule time with myself or one of our cloud advisors. Just contact us. And when it comes to contacting us, there's the company contact information, an email, including that scheduling link, or you can contact me directly. I'm not good about answering the phone and responding to voice messages, so really send me an email at the address on the screen. I don't have an assistant. I'll answer either directly or I'll loop in a member of my team who's best able to help you, and we'll take things forward. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today. We're really close to the top of the hour. So I want to thank those who are watching this recording on demand. Again, contact us for any follow-up or questions. And we appreciate you joining us here today. I'm going to halt the recording. I'll hang on the line for those watching the live session for a few minutes to see if they have any questions they'd like answered. Thank you very much and have a great day.